So welcome everybody. I'm glad everybody's here. Thank you all for joining us on our final day of Veterans Week, Friday. But this is one of my favorite panels. So this is a reoccurring one we've been doing for a number of years. Our Women in the Military panel. It's one of my favorite ones to see. It's always a pleasure to meet our female veterans, guests and panelists. And I'm always amazed at the stories they tell. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to the moderator for today, Jennifer Lamb.
Hey, thanks so much, Phil. And thank you everybody for joining, especially today, the last day of Vets Week. I'm going to throw out a few little rules for everybody for this. Really what I'm looking for, if you served in the military and you are joining us, not as a panelist, but as an observer, go ahead and put something in the comments so that we know who all in the this room that we get to share, who is part of this tribe of service members. I'm also going to encourage people throughout to type in some questions. I have some pre-prepared questions for our panel, but I will absolutely give plenty of time for those who are joining us to have questions as well. So let's do a little bit of quick introductions before we get going. As Phil had said, my name is Jennifer Lamb. I'm the least interesting person of this entire panel. So I served in the United States Marine Corps from 1994 to 2002. But my goal with this panel is really to introduce you to a bunch of fantastic, amazing women that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years or couple of days or even couple of minutes here. So let's see who's on our panel today. The first person I have is Lydia. Lydia, let me give a little introduction and then I've got a few questions for you. So Lydia is a Coast Guard veteran. You see that top picture there? If you want to pick out who she is, she's the woman. And that's kind of what happens in the Coast Guard. So currently women make up 12% of the Coast Guard, which means that picture with all of the people up there adequately represents the number of men to women if you were to explode it for the entire Coast Guard. Thanks for joining us, Lydia. Can you tell me a little bit about why you chose to join the Coast Guard?
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you. That picture, I'll expand on that a little bit. It does adequately represent the gender difference in the Coast Guard, but of all of the women that serve, only a portion of them are engineers or law enforcement officers. A lot of the women have, I guess, what are more desk jobs because it's more conducive to family life. So
that wasn't you. You didn't have a desk job. What was your job?
I was kind of a mix of a lot of things. What the Coast Guard does is it takes jobs. It's very similar to the Navy in structure, but it takes 2 or 3 jobs that the Navy has and it combines them into one. So as a machinery technician, I did kind of a machinist mate and boiler technician and a little bit of electronics work all as one. But I was also involved in search and rescue and law enforcement and tactical operations. And that crew picture that you see on the top left is the tactical operations crew from my last unit in Florida. And I was the only girl in that crew and a lot of times the only girl on the boat. And it was actually a lot of fun. But
thank you. I have lots of questions for you. I think the Coast Guard is an amazing branch of our military service. The next person I'm going to pop up here is Greta. Greta's a friend of mine. She is a research investigator for the transplant section of the Department of Surgery. But she served in the Army Nursing Corps for quite a many years, from 1986 to 2006. And Greta, you gave me lots of amazing pictures about your service as a critical care nurse. Can you say hi to everybody and introduce yourself a little for us?
My name is Greta Krapel, and like Jennifer said, I was an ICU nurse in the Army Nurse Corps for 20 years. And when retired, moved to Michigan. I want to thank everyone for being on the Zoom call today, and also to my colleagues at work who are just really great support for me and who helped me make a transition, which might be one of your questions, Jennifer, transitioning from military to civilian life. And they've really helped me in that transition, and they do okay with military time also. And I'm really appreciate that they're they're here today. And so, like I said, I was in ROTC. I was probably like the least likely one to join the military, but my roommate in college in nursing school was in ROTC. And next thing you know, I'm talking to a recruiter doing push-ups and sit-ups at Fort Knox. And then she got out of the military right away. And then I stayed in for 20 years. So, you know, it's funny how that works. And then I met my husband, Graydon, and he was in the Marine Corps. I outranked him, which was good. And then we have one daughter. She was born at Fort Bragg. So we moved 17 times and I've been all over the world. Happy to be here today and all the other women veterans. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us, Greta. Next, I'm going to throw up one of my colleagues. So this is Callie Lake. Callie, many of you that have joined might know Callie because she is the program director for PAVE, for Peer Advisors for Veteran Education, which does have a program here at U of M. But Callie enlisted in the North Dakota Army National Guard as a combat medic and liked what she did enough that she transferred to the North Dakota Air National Guard to serve as a firefighter. Eventually, Callie took her commission and she's still serving in the North Dakota Air National Guard as an intelligence officer. Callie, how is it that you are here in Michigan and still serving in the North Dakota National Guard?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Well, I'm in my 19th, well, going on to be 20 years in June. And so luckily I have some really good leadership back in North Dakota, and they wanted to keep me in that unit before I retire. So after my 20 years, I'll be getting out. But yeah, going back to, you know, what Lydia had mentioned and just being, or, you know, we first mentioned in the beginning is the only female in so my job as a firefighter being the only female out of 40 guys when I deployed, and it was a really unique experience. And I just you know, I really resent, like the words Lydia was talking about really hit home, you know, when we're just on our own sometimes out there, but still part of a big team. And so I'm happy to be part of this panel, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit more with everybody, and looking forward to your questions.
I do think you'll hear throughout this panel over and over again, women talking about being the only one or one of a few people in what they did or where they were. And I think that's an important piece that we'll circle back to once we meet everybody. The next person on the panel is Colleen. Colleen commissioned into the Army out of college. She served in various roles in the Army. She worked as an administrative specialist. She was a unit victims advocate and a unit trainer. She was an AH-64 Apache twin turbo shaft attack helicopter pilot. Pretty amazing history with her. Colleen, can you tell us a little bit? I used a phrase there. Can you talk to people what it means to commission, and tell me a little bit about why you chose the family business when you left college?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. I'm happy to be here today, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So I initially enlisted as an admin specialist, and then I did ROTC and commissioned. And the reason that I did that was mostly because my dad told me to be honest. He was enlisted for over 25 years. And so he wanted me to see the other side. And he felt that officers were treated a little bit differently, or in his mind better. And so he pushed very hard for me to go to the officer corps. And as you mentioned, it was the family business. So the military was kind of always my path.
And I forgot to mention, Colleen, tell us a little bit about how you've carried that past into what you've done at U of M and what you're doing now, if you don't mind.
Sure. So within the military, I was, as you said, a unit victim advocate, and that really sparked a passion in me for equity issues and sexual misconduct issues. And so that kind of led me into the career field of being an investigator for discrimination and harassment, and also sexual misconduct, which I've since left that position here at the university, actually, and am now working on a nonprofit dedicated to equity education.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome to our panel, Colleen. Hey, Laura, where are you on my little thing? There she is. Hey, Laura. So Laura was in the United States Army. Don't get fooled because she's wearing she's on a naval ship there. You were also a critical care nurse in the Army Nursing Corps. I forget, Laura, I didn't know what years you served. Can you fill us in a little bit about when you served? Tell me what's going on in that picture, why they let a soldier on a boat.
Yeah, so I actually was one of those nerdy kids in high school. I did junior ROTC, so I've been doing military stuff since I was like 13 or 14. So I commissioned out of college from ROTC, and I commissioned as an Army nurse. And that picture there on the left is actually my promotion ceremony to captain aboard the USS Missouri, which is a really, really special ship. It's where World War II ended. So it's currently in harbor at Pearl Harbor, which I was really, really fortunate. I got to live down in Pearl Harbor. So I did get to be an ICU nurse in Hawaii, which was, just a terrible job. So yeah, that's why they let me aboard the ship. And I promoted there with a few of my friends. We all went through the ICU course that I'm sure, Greta, you're familiar with, together. So yeah, I was in for about 5.5 years.
Oh, excellent. And then the strangest thing about Laura for our audience to know, in that second picture, she's there with her Coast Guard veteran husband. And somehow the two of them are Cleveland Browns fans. So we forgive you, Laura. Ariana, can you unmute? This is Ariana. She commissioned into the United States Navy as a surface warfare officer. When I asked everybody on this panel, what's the coolest thing about you? She had probably the coolest answer. She can drive the second largest naval ship and can shoot off missiles. I can't imagine being able to say that to people at various times. So can you unmute and introduce yourself to our panel for us?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ariana Kasani. I commissioned in 2011 from Notre Dame ROTC, and I'm still serving, but I'm in the reserves currently, and I was stationed in San Diego the entire time.
So we've had a couple of people talk about being in the reserves and the National Guard. Can you tell us a little bit, what does it mean to serve in the reserves for anybody that doesn't know what that is?
Yeah, so the reserves are basically, think of it as part-time Navy. So you have a certain commitment during the year, which is about 12 weekends a year, but it varies based on the unit you're assigned to. So you still get to be a part of the military and you can be deployed, but you're still serving your country. So it's a great organization, in my opinion.
And let me just throw up here, when we talk about you being able to drive a boat, we're talking about pretty much a mobile city that's out there on the ocean, right? Stephanie, I see you there. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome to Friday and Veterans Week. I've seen you on a few panels throughout this week. Stephanie is in the Air Force Reserves currently, so very similar to some of these women that we've already heard from, had your commitment, worked through in the Air Force, and now you're balancing getting your master's in electrical and computer engineering and putting on a uniform occasionally 1 week in a month or so. Is that about right?
Well, trying to, yes. But yes, I was active duty. I enlisted after my freshman year of college. This happened with the recession in 2008. So for me, it was more of the get an extra like plan B career type of thing. I was studying engineering at the time, and I was hoping to continue that with the military, kind of do it on both sides, but needs of the Air Force, needs of the military. So I enlisted as an operations analyst, and after my initial commitment, I went to the reserves. I was still full-time for a while, up until the past couple of years. I've been doing just the minimum to finish off my undergrad, and then now I'm doing my master's.
Excellent, excellent. Lori, I think if you can unmute yourself. This is Lori Young. Lori served in the Army for 5 years, I want to say, as a chaplain's assistant. Is that right, Lori?
It is. I did, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I served 1 year in the reserves because I actually did a program called delayed entry where you take your senior year and do become a weekend warrior. And then after I graduated high school, I went to active duty for 5 more years.
Oh, wow. And so why did you choose the Army? So there are chaplain's assistants in a couple of branches. Why did the Army appeal to you?
Because I didn't know how great the Air Force quality of life was. I've always said if I went back in, I'd go Air Force. I mean, so don't tell my Army friends, they might kick me out of the club. But I mean, the Army was a great experience. But if I could have a do-over, I wouldn't go Army. But to be honest, I was only exposed to the Army and Navy recruiters. And so I didn't really ever meet an Air Force recruiter, anyone who had that experience to really know what it offered.
Makes sense to me. That makes perfect sense. Helen, I don't have any pictures for you. Can you introduce yourself for the audience here, Helen, if you're out there? Helen Budd, are you out there? Can you unmute?
I am. I'm sorry. I was distracted for a second. I actually haven't served, but I serve our student veterans at U of M Flint, at the Flint campus. So I take care of our veterans and our service members and our guardsmen and dependents. I'm very happy to do so.
Excellent, excellent. I knew that you do a lot of work for veterans, and you probably are around a lot of these veterans on a regular basis. But I'm going to take a second and I'm going to throw out a question for our panel and see if a couple of you can answer these some questions for our whole group. And while you're answering, I'm going to scroll through the chat just a little bit, make sure I didn't miss any questions from other people. But the first thing that I like to ask people, and I asked a few of you, there's 5, now 6 branches of service that we talk about when we talk about the military, and each of them lovingly makes fun of each other, but they all have a very different feel and a different flair to them. Lydia, let me go back to you. So why did you pick the Coast Guard?
I guess it's appropriate that you ask me first because we all know that the Coast Guard is the redheaded stepchild of the military. And we have a saying that people don't really appreciate us until they need us. And I was stationed up in the Bering Sea, and we conducted things like fisheries inspections where we would board fishing boats and inspect their catch and write them tickets for things they weren't supposed to have. It's a huge part of what the Coast Guard does that's not law enforcement and not search and rescue. But with the fishermen in Alaska specifically, we were not very appreciated because we were taking up their time on the fishing boats, wasting their time. But then things go south when a storm rolls through and they really appreciate you then. But I think one of the things with the Coast Guard is that a lot of people just don't know what they do. And it's when I met a recruiter for the first time, I had swum on a team pretty much my entire childhood and was thinking about it going into college, but didn't really know what I wanted to do in terms of an education. And I met this Coast Guard recruiter, and he said, "Oh, you're a swimmer. You should think about joining the Coast Guard." And I said, "What's the Coast Guard?" And he explained it to me, and I still wasn't too sure about it. And I said, "Call me in 2 years, and if I'm not in school or if I'm not employed, if I don't have direction, I'll do it." And he called me to the day 2 years later, June 2nd, and I wasn't doing anything. And I enlisted, and then I went home and told my parents. And it was a learning experience because I had never heard of it. I went to high school here in Michigan. I know a lot of people that go to school over in, South Haven, in Grand Haven, they know all about the Coast Guard. But I chose that over other branches because it was small. There were a couple job opportunities I was interested in, like the Coast Guard has an intelligence branch. But I also liked the idea of having a day-to-day job where you're just helping people every day. And there were a lot of days that I had to vacuum up water off of a boat because I was a young enlisted person and you do random jobs like that. But outside of those, menial tasks, there is what felt like really meaningful work. And I really liked the Coast Guard mission compared to the other branches. So.
How about who joined the Army? Colleen, Greta, Lori, tell us a little bit about why you chose Laura. Tell us a little bit about why you chose the Army. Does anybody want to share that?
Sure. So I joined the Army because that was what my dad had done. My brother joined the Army. He tried to push us towards the Air Force, but I went Army instead.
And then you still flew.
Yes.
Anyone else? Yeah,
I'm the same as Laura. My father was enlisted in the Army. I remember he said, no, I don't want you joining the Army. But when I told him it would pay for my college, he was like, oh yeah, go ahead, join the Army. But I had to laugh at what Lori said about the Air Force, because I kind of felt like that too. I just kind of fell into it. But the Air Force, they always did look like they had duty a little bit better than those of us that were on the ground. So that made me laugh.
So let's talk about the Air Force. So Callie, I'm going to throw this one to you because you did both the Army and the Air Force. So you got to trial them both a little bit. Tell us what it was like to move from one branch of service to another.
Thank you. That's a good question. And I'm smiling when I hear the stories about if I would have known about the Army, I would have maybe joined the Air Force first. The Army recruiter was closest, and I knew I wanted to go to college, and I knew I didn't have a means to pay for it. And so they were the closest they came to the high school. And so that's why I joined the Army. And I chose the MOS, or the job with the highest bonus that I could, that was with the battalion that was closest to us. So that made sense to me. And then as a medic, so as an Army combat medic, and as a medic, I had an EMT, and I had to keep my CEUs up and keep the certification. So I went to a conference in Fargo, North Dakota. I don't know if anybody hears the accent, but from Fargo. And I met a gentleman from the Air Force and said, well, if you have to do EMT stuff, why don't you do firefighting? And I thought, okay. And I just didn't really know a whole lot about either of the branches. I knew more about the Army now because I had been in it for a couple of years. But I thought, okay, I was open to another option, and I explored enlisting into the Air Force, and it was a simple process. It was just a little bit of paperwork, and I was able to transfer. And I'm glad that I did, because I missed, there's some like, so the difference between the two in my mind is like, there's this, like, the Army is like, go out, anybody can do any job and get it done. And then the Air Force is very specific in their job roles. Like when I was a firefighter, that's what I did. I wasn't expected to go out and do another role of being a, MP or some other job while deployed. And when I'm an intelligence officer, that's my job. And we really focus on those things. But so there's pros and cons to both. I'm happy to be part of both and have that in my experience.
Stephanie, it sounds like you made the best choice and just went straight into the Air Force, according to these women. Why did you choose the Air Force?
So I didn't know, I'm not from the US originally, and I didn't know anything about the military going into like growing up or anything. And I'm also from South Florida, so like there's just not a lot of Latinos, a lot of immigrants, and so I remember like the first time I ever heard about like the military, I was in JROTC or whatever in middle school. But as far as like actually like being like somebody as a career type of option, was like my junior year of high school, and I started getting, we were given the option to take the ASVAB test. If we took it, it was like a lot of us in AP classes. And if we took it, we were able to like leave class, like not go to class because all of our exams were done. So we all took it just because, and then your name is in the system now. So I started getting phone calls from Marine recruiters, and that's the first time I heard about it. And so they started talking about all the benefits. And that's the very first time that I was like, oh, wow, they have education and they have training and you can live, overseas and like all this stuff. Marine recruiters, super nice. But, for me, I was like, I'm going to go to college. So I did. And then when my friendships expanded, that's when I started meeting other people that were in other services. And the Air Force, I just knew somebody that had gone in right after high school. And doing research back then, I think it just seemed like, okay, this is what I would like to do. I don't remember exactly. I remember it was between the Navy and the Air Force. But the Navy, like the fact that you have to be at a ship sometimes for like months at a time. And I was like, I don't want to be in the middle of a ship, like that's not the kind of life that I want for myself. So that was one of them. And so there's just little things, right? Like but the Navy also has really good ports, like where you get stationed at, whereas the Air Force, middle of nowhere, because you need more land. So different factors there that it made me narrow it down to the Air Force eventually.
And then let me go back and address an acronym you used. You talked about the ASVAB, the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery. This is for anybody that didn't take this test. I had to take it in high school. I think when I grew up in Oklahoma and everybody had to take it. And I later found out that wasn't the case for public schools all over the country. But this is a standardized test that you take, and it helps determine what your skills or what your abilities would be to be able to go into the military. So when Stephanie talked about taking that ASVAB, yep, they get your name, and based on your score, they can really try to put you in a position that you would like or that matches what your skills and abilities are. You had talked about kind of debating between Air Force and Navy. We've got some Navy, some sailors here. Who joined the Navy and why did you choose?
I don't know. I might be the only Navy person, but
I think you're right. I'm looking at you.
I am actually 4th generation Navy. So my great grandfather was in World War I. I spent my 5th, in kindergarten. We spent a field trip on my dad's ship because he was the captain. So it was definitely family oriented.
One of the things I find fascinating when you look at what a woman veteran looks like, fewer and fewer women are legacies, meaning that their parents or their grandparents were in the service and then they joined. This is something that seems to be more applicable to men, but I'm hearing from many of you that you are a legacy service member, that you followed in a family member's footsteps. Was there anybody that was following in their family members' footsteps and went in a different direction? For example, my father was in the Navy and I wanted to do a little bit different, so I joined the Marine Corps. Did anybody else go in a different direction than what their family had showed them or demonstrated?
I think I can kind of speak to that a little bit. So I'm like the next generation, like it skipped a generation in my family. My grandfather was in World War II, but he was in the Army. But most of my family has gone into some sort of aerospace type job. My dad's a pilot, my uncle is an air traffic controller. My younger brother flies UAVs. So I just went in a completely different direction and went medical. So I am still kind of that legacy and went in the same direction as my grandfather, but I will say I think it's a very different Army, than it was when he joined.
It's amazing, Laura, how quickly services change through 10 years, 20 years, and you become the old school person versus the new and modern in whatever branch of service you're in. I'm going to continue to ask questions of our panelists, but I'm also going to open it up. We've got, about 75 people that have joined this panel. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to type them into the comments, but I'll also open it up for you to open your mic and ask a question if you want. While you're thinking about questions, I am going to ask each person on our panel probably my favorite question. I know for a fact that everybody that served in the military has that story, the story that they tell about their military service. Is there anybody that'd like to give us just a brief, 2 to 4 minute story about what it was like for them to serve?
I don't know how to pick just one, Jennifer. You've given us I don't think any of us could narrow it down to just one story.
It is hard, right? It's trying to encapsulate many years and many pivotal years of your life into one small story. But I do know that many people have something. I know, chatting with Greta, Greta's had a couple of stories that she's shared with me. Maybe why don't I pick on you to kick it off for us?
Sure. I was thinking of one that I think one thing the military does is it gives you extraordinary opportunities. And I was never really a really great student, and never really that I was always a good athlete, but always like when someone got hurt, like, hey, Greta, get ready to go in. I was always a good athlete, but not the best, and a good student, but not the best. But I felt like in the military, I had some really great opportunities. And one that I'll always remember is I did interview for the White House medical unit under President Clinton, and I got the job. Excuse me, that's another story. I just was the only one that passed my security clearance, really. It's that kind of job. But the one day when President Clinton, met my parents, and I'm from a regular middle class family. My dad was a teacher, my mom was a social worker, and like I said, my father was enlisted in the Army. But the day that they stood there and got to meet the President of the United States, and President Clinton, was talking to him, we love having insert name here, Greta at the White House, and he was just very gracious, and it meant so much to my parents. They sent it out on their Christmas card. And I think for me, just being like a normal middle-class kid and having an opportunity to watch, work at the highest levels of watching democracy in action, if you will, that was just a super great opportunity. And that's why I always tell people, and also for my parents, just to have that opportunity. It was really, really neat for me to be able to have that experience for them. But that's what I encourage people to join the military. I'm like, you don't have to stay in 20 years like I did. Like, I never thought I'd stay in 20 years, but I think it just gives you opportunities to work in places you never thought you'd work, and with people and that, from everywhere in the country, and just the diversity of experience, and it is just unmatched. So I always encourage everyone to do it if they're able to, and it's a privilege to serve. Not everyone can do that. So so that's just my little story, that just taking an ordinary kid, and I've just had some really extraordinary experiences.
Which kind of led to, there was a question in the comments asking about if you knew that this was an aha moment for you, or if you realized that joining the military was a good decision. I'm gonna.
Oh no, I wouldn't say so.
No?
I wouldn't say so, because actually, like, that assignment probably wasn't like one of my favorite assignments. I think actually, like, my favorite assignment was, like being an ICU nurse, being the head nurse of an ICU or something. You could, just testing yourself as a leader and being able to influence patient care and working with a great team.
Okay. Okay.
So I think that was a really cool experience, but I think mostly being tested as a leader kind of pushes to his limits. I'd like to see some of the other panelists, but I know that you've all my fellow panelists have been like pushed to the limits in some ways, and kind of knowing what your limits are, that's an education in and of itself. So that wasn't as much of an aha moment. And plus also too, you're a little bit embarrassed about it when you go back into like the field and they're like, oh, what was your last assignment? And you're like, oh, because they think, oh, you're foo-foo, or, poured a lot of coffee or something. So the thing is,
in fact, I know that you lied about, or you or one of your colleagues would lie about what this was.
It has a badge that has the presidential, that you have presidential service on there. And, people would ask me, oh, hey, what's that badge? And I'd be like, yeah, it's like the space shuttle. I just didn't want to like tell people all the time. So.
Who
But yeah,
Who else has a story? Does anybody have like the story that they tell about their military experience when someone asked them what it was like to serve in the military?
I could maybe share as one, just so there's a lot of adjectives that you could describe, but like it just overwhelming sometimes, and how diverse it is. When I deployed in it's the Air Force to Baghdad as a firefighter, in one day I saw a Russian so we were at the international airport and my job was to provide fire protection for the international airport. In one day I saw Russian aircraft fly in. I played cards with Australian soldiers. I saw the German soldiers in the DFAC, and I was working with guys from New York, Texas, and California. No other place, career could that's just not going to happen anywhere else but the military in my mind. And so it was just, I kind of went to bed that night thinking that happened to me. And I'm just grew up on a farm in, the middle of nowhere in North Dakota, and that just happened to me. So that's kind of one of the stories I like to share, that you get to just meet people from all walks of life. It's really amazing.
So let me ask a question that showed up in the comments here. So there are not a lot of women in the military. The common thing that I hear is that women in the military are the most visual, and then veterans are the most invisible that there are out there. Were any of you treated differently by the men in the military? Was it difficult did the female soldiers, sailors, airmen, did any of you get treated differently by your male colleagues?
Yes. In short, yes, definitely treated differently. And I watched others get treated differently too. There are very few female Apache pilots in the Army or any service. There's very few Apache pilots, period. But there's definitely a difference, especially at first. I would say things are getting better. But I'll shamelessly plug the next section is about sexual harassment in the military, which is a good segue to that if you wanted to come to the 2 o'clock session for that. We'll go into some detail about that.
I know when I served in the military, a lot of times I felt that my male counterparts wanted to try to protect me more and try to look out for me, and they would make sure that my coffee was hot. Anybody else have experiences where you were treated maybe a little bit differently, good or bad, by your male colleagues?
I will say that it in my experience, it really depended on how I treated them as well. And I was fortunate enough to get to my first unit right out of boot camp. I went to a ship that was in the Pacific, home ported in Seattle. And my mentor on the boat was a woman who was a rank or two higher than me at the time, and her name was Kate. And she took me in under her wing, and she gave me some of the best advice that I received in my time there, that I then passed on to other like junior enlisted women. And one of those was treating the men like they're brothers, and they will in turn treat you like you're a sister, and they'll want to protect you, and they'll have your back. And we went on port calls in a lot of places in northern Russia and along Central and South America and up in the Bering Sea. And there are a lot of times that, they said nobody goes into a bar on a port call by themselves. And there are definitely times that I remember ordering a drink at a bar and, somebody wanting to come talk to me, and immediately there's one of the other guys from the engine room standing right next to me, making sure that I'm never alone. I know that experiences are different for every female veteran. And that's something that I try to explain anytime I talk on one of these panels, is that every one of us has a different experience and has different stories to share. So I know that my experience was a very positive one. But I was fortunate enough to have a couple female mentors on that ship that really taught me that from the beginning. And that's how I handle relationships with even the veteran guys on campus. I treat them like brothers, and they treat me with respect and treat me like a sister in return.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and if I could add, so for me, the bulk of my service has been in an office with, you know, all males. And the people that I supervised were always males, and they were also older than me. So that was another interesting thing, right? Like reporting to somebody who's a few years to, you know, a lot more younger than you, I would say, just because I ranked up pretty fast throughout my career. But one of the things that stands out, my last deployment, we were right before it, like people had to take their PD test, their physical fitness test. And a couple of the guys, you know, they were struggling for their test. And I remember there's this whole like, well, you have your standards for females. So for those of you who don't know, the standards for females are usually a little bit less. They're different than for males. And I don't think that's across the board, but just for us it is. But so the whole thing is like, well, of course you got an excellent because your standards are not as bad as ours or something, right? So I remember making it a point to, every time I took my fitness test, I would always calculate it based on the male standard, and I would always get a better score than them. And so for me, it was like kind of putting it on for myself, like, okay, you want to tell me this? Let me tell you how that's incorrect, because I can still pass your PD test better than you can. And I think things like that, just kind of evening out the playing field, letting them know it's not because you're a woman, it's not because you're younger, it's not because of whatever. I think that helps a lot with kind of just letting them know, like, it's not a gender thing or a sex thing, you know what I mean? But I mean, in general, I've always gotten respect. When we've done hiring in previous units, it's, you know, a thing that my superiors have always been super respectful and super, you know, they understand, like, I'm a hard worker and everything. And, you know, if we're doing interviews for people who want to join, it's a matter of like, one of the questions is always like, are you going to be okay with reporting to a female, reporting to somebody who may be younger than you? And if there's a vibe that, you know, if in the past, if there's been a vibe that this person won't respect the person as a whole, the rank, the position, then, you know, it's a no-go as far as like hiring goes. So
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You talked a little bit about standards, Stephanie, and I saw in the chat somebody had asked, how did you get through the toughest times of boot camp? But I'm going to open that up just a little bit broader. What was the most physically demanding part of your job, and how did you get through that? Anyone?
I can speak to that. The most physically demanding part of my job is literally lifting patients in bed. You know, because you can get 300-pound patients and you're like, oh God, I got to lift this guy up in bed. And it was always kind of a little bit embarrassing to have to ask the boys, you know, to come help you. But without a doubt, every single time they were just like, yep, we'll come help you. No problem. Never, ever had an issue. I mean, nursing is female dominated, really. But there's more and more men in nursing now. And I've never felt, you know, like there was any big difference there. So that's just kind of my little experience.
Lori, how about you? I haven't heard from you for a little bit. What was the most physically demanding part of what you did?
You know, honestly, the most physically demanding was the heat. On a particular deployment, it was like 112 plus every day. And we worked outside. We were in working camps. And that was the hardest part. Just because you're constantly moving, you're working 12, 16-hour days. And that was, I'm a native Michigander. So we didn't have that nice cooling off period with the gorgeous trees that we're in right now. So that was the biggest part. But, you know, everybody has their way of getting through it, you know, and that is really where, when you get to a difficult moment in the military, it really comes down to what's in you. You know, I always say the military, some people work in the military and they do a great job because they're disciplined. Some people do a great job because they become disciplined. It makes a difference what you bring to the table. You know, I came to the military with a great amount of discipline, and I came to the military with a sense of identity. Because one thing about the military, and this goes back to what Greta says, when it pushes you to your limits. When I was growing up, my mom used to have the saying, she would say, you need to know your favorite flavor. And I would like, okay. And she said, you need to know what you like and why, and who you are and why you are. And I think because a lot of us go into the military so early, you know, if you don't take the traditional college path, then you're learning that amongst all these other people and you're exposed to different cultures. And there's so many things that help you figure it out, but you do have to know that. And so when you get into those difficult moments, knowing your favorite flavor, you know, knowing what's in you, that helps you just push through, whether it's prayer, whether it's reading, whether it's connecting with someone, whether it's that phone call home, whatever it is. You know, it's less about the physical aspect. It's really a mental aspect in the military. You know, that's really what you have to push through, because everything else you can do, but it's what's in you and what you value and how you see yourself. That to me is what you have to master.
Lori, I just wrote down my new favorite phrase. So you have to know your favorite flavor is definitely something I'm going to start using.
Okay.
How about, so you guys all talked about a little bit, many people join the military when they're young. The military is made up of the young, and then people age through the military. But when this is your pivotal starting point into adulthood, what is transition like? What is it like to transition out of the military when this has been your life? Ariana, I haven't heard from you for a little bit.
Yeah, I can take that. So it's not easy. It's definitely a transition culturally. You have to adapt to different, just different types of people too. Like there's this really great, I think the thing that I love about the military the most is just the sense of camaraderie and the teams that you're on. And that is a lot more difficult to find outside of the military, I found. So, but the people that I still, you know, lean on are my friends that have transitioned or are still in the military. So they'll always be that support. And I know that they're going to be lifelong friends. So they make it a little easier.
So I'm hearing some loss of camaraderie and kind of trying to figure out where you're going to go next. Who else has some insight? What was it like to transition out of the military? Lydia, do you have something?
I guess I'll speak about it from an undergraduate student perspective. It is pretty tough being in classes with kids that are about 10 years younger than you. Different sense of humor, different stage of life. At least once a semester, not this time on Zoom, but at least once a semester, I get mistaken for the GSI of a course, and they come up to me and they ask me for questions with the homework and ask for help. And so that part of it is funny, but it is also tough. You know, when I started school here at U of M, I was living off of campus and had living in a house and having a part-time job outside of school. And the kids on campus want to meet for group homework at 9 p.m. somewhere random on campus. And I'm like ready for bed at 9 p.m. So that part of it was tough. But I think the hardest part for me was I had about 3 weeks in between active duty and starting school full time. And I went from being out on a search call almost daily, or some kind of law enforcement call daily, to sitting in a lecture, taking notes. And I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie by the time I got out, and it was really hard kind of feeling like I wasn't being productive or not doing something to help people. And that took a few months to get used to, that this was just a new pace of life that I had to adjust to.
Yeah.
But luckily the student vet community on campus is pretty strong. And once I got involved with them, I could start using my acronyms again and talk to people who understood this part of my life. And that made it a lot easier.
How about anybody else? What was it like to transition either out of the military, or some of you went from being everyday military to 1 week in a month military? What is that transition like?
So when I left the military, I left sort of unexpectedly. I thought I was going to be a lifer. I was going to be in for 20 years. But for some medical reasons, I had to get out. And I remember thinking and calling my parents, and I was like, what am I going to do? All I've ever wanted to be or known is being a nurse in the Army. So that was a really, really hard transition. And just applying for a job was terrifying. You know, I didn't know really how to interview for a job because I never had to. It was just like, here's where I want to go. And they say, okay, you're going here. Like, all right, cool, let's go. And I didn't have to do anything for myself, really. You know, the military moved all of my stuff. They made sure I had a sponsor when I got somewhere new. You know, my medical was taken care of. And getting out of the military, it's like, oh my gosh, I have all of these different things I have to take care of now. And I have to figure out now how to move myself across the country again. You know, and I've got to find this new job. I've got to interview for it. And then I've got to make friends with all these new people who don't know anything about the military. So just like Ariana said, it's that loss of camaraderie is really hard. But I was really fortunate in the job that I got here. I'm actually in Cleveland right now. So the job I got here, there's a bunch of vets on my unit. So that was really nice and just kind of eased the transition a little bit.
Colleen, what was it like when you left? I know you left the Army and you really found your pursuit in life and have followed that, but what was it like to leave your service?
Yeah, so it was really hard. I want to echo what the other panelists have said about it being hard to lose that camaraderie with your other service members, because we've used the term like big brother, big sister, and it really is like a family, and you lose a piece of your family when you leave the military. And it's very isolating. And when I initially left, I was actually a stay-at-home mom. And so I went, like to Lydia's point about feeling like I had a purpose every day and something that I was doing. And then to change completely gears and to slow down life, it was a very hard transition for me. I actually ended up hospitalized because of how hard that transition mentally was for me. So yeah, it's difficult to leave, but I think since then, once you find your group and you get those folks together in your support system, it's a success. It's a successful transition.
So you started to answer a question that was forming in my head. There's going to be people that leave the service after us. There's going to be people that continue to join and continue to leave. What can we do to help them have a better transition, or what advice can we give them to have a better transition? You said to find a community, Colleen. Is there other things that have been helpful when you left the service to be able to kind of move into your civilian world?
Jennifer,
Greta.
I was thinking, I noticed, and some of my colleagues on the panel, but going back to school for me was really good, and that would really help me with my transition. It gave me like in between, like a transition time. So I used the GI Bill when I got out of the military, and I went back to school here at University of Michigan. That's when I met Phil when I was first here, and it really kind of then I could, cut back on the acronyms a little bit, and I met some really nice friends when I was studying, and that was a really good transition. So whenever I meet a veteran that's getting out of the military or thinking about it, I'm like, use your GI Bill, just because it's just kind of, it was for me a really good time to transition. And maybe a little bit related, Jennifer, is that I feel like my job now is, and I'm older than a lot of the people on the panel, is that I need to be an advocate for the soldiers that are serving right now, because many that have injuries, they might be okay when they're young, 20s, 30s, even 40s, but when they're in their 50s and their 60s, the limbs that they lost, their hips gonna be hurting them, and there's gonna be other things that they're going to, their health. So I always feel like being an advocate for other veterans, and I found some camaraderie in some of those groups as well.
So I've heard, so just by like a show of hands from the panelists, how many of you got out of the service and used the GI Bill, the guarantee for further education, to go back to school or to extend your education? What I think is fascinating, if you don't have your screen so you can see everybody, that's everybody. Everybody that is on the panel went back to school in some form, which also means, back to a couple of points that like Lydia had made, it means any of these people, when you went back to school, you're automatically the oldest person in your class, or close to being one of the older people in your class, because you went back a little bit later than other people. And I think that that's a fascinating thing that we hear from everybody on the panel, talking about being older and kind of feeling out of place a little bit.
They call it chronologically challenged, Jennifer, just so you know. It's chronologically challenged.
Or they call it.
I too was the old
non-traditional
lady in my
student.
class, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Well,
was I.
we're coming up on time, but I have a question that I love to ask people. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists to unmute your microphones, and it'll make it go a little bit easier. But I'm going to ask each of you, what's one word that you would use to describe your military service?
Beneficial.
Wait, say that again. I didn't quite catch that one.
Beneficial.
Beneficial. What else do we have?
I'd go with awesome.
Awesome.
Unique.
Okay.
Rewarding.
Yeah, I was going to either say fulfilling or exhilarating.
Educational.
Okay.
I kind of have two words, eye-opening.
We'll hyphenate it and it'll work. Okay.
Grateful.
Grateful. I always tell people it was my greatest honor. It was something that I didn't know how fascinating it would be, but I'm sure glad that I had that under my belt. Now I'm going to change the topic just a slight bit. So those were your one word to describe your military service. Does that word match if I were to ask you to pick one word to describe your veteran experiences?
Yes, for me.
No, I think no, I would say I learned more on active duty, and as a veteran, I give more. So I think that's the difference.
I like that.
I think I have more appreciation for what I was able to do.
I agree with that, Laura. I feel very reflective when I think back to my service in a different way than when I was actually knee deep in mud.
I think it's still rewarding, but just in a different sense. Instead of helping members of the public, now as a PAVE advisor and as the SVA vice president and these other things that I do with the university, it's more rewarding to the veteran community. So it's still rewarding, but I'm just serving a different population now.
Anyone else? Well, I'm going to kind of close this up a little bit then. You know, the women's panel, the women's veteran panel, is by far my favorite panel of all of the things that Phil Larson puts together for Veterans Week, because you get to sit here and look at these amazing, beautiful, fierce women. And it is not very often that you get to see that many fierce women with strong stories talking about what they did to get where they are now. And so I'm really excited that you guys could all join us for this panel. And I'm hoping, among all hopes, that next year we might be able to do this panel in person.
Thank you, Jennifer, for moderating, and we'll see you back here next year.
Hey, thanks to everybody. I really appreciate all of you coming.
Thank you for having me. It's great to
Thank
meet you
you.
all.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Nice meeting everyone too.
What a great tribe. I thank all of you for opening up your tribe to let me be a part of it. So thank you guys.